Now that Bitcoin's officially at $100,000, pretty much every person I run into, it sort of teases me. They're like, Bitcoin's fine. Bitcoin's at 100K, baby. I wish I bought it. And they don't seem to really grasp how drastic this change is going to be, how much of an impact the technology is going to have, not just on their lives directly, but on the world as a whole. And one of the biggest problems that I find people having, especially being on the Bitcoin maximalist side of this whole change, is helping people understand Bitcoin. And how do you explain it to them? Because sure, you can get into, it's built on a blockchain, and blockchain allows, you can get really technical with it, and you use all these terms that people don't genuinely understand. And it's like learning a new language, or it's a whole new concept that people can't grasp. Similar to like paper money back in the day, used to be, people didn't believe it existed when I think it was in China when like the first paper currency came about, and they used paper as money, and other, I think it was Marco Polo, I'm pretty sure. I might be completely wrong on this history, but he brought back the idea, and he said, yeah, they use paper money in these empires, and people thought he was absurd. So all money really is as a whole is it's people's trust in something maintaining its value. And as long as you can use US dollar to purchase goods and services, people have trust to hold that currency, because someone's willing to accept it as a form of value for offering whatever good or service they want to offer. And I'm going on a mind tangent here. But the objective of this video is how can you help somebody understand and conceptualize Bitcoin as a whole, not so much on the side of the analytical cryptography technology, because even myself, I don't even know how the engineering of it really works. However, I understand its characteristics and its qualities, and I understand that it has proven to maintain those characteristics and qualities, and as long as it continues to do so, it's going to have this impact on the world. And so yeah, backtracking it, how do you explain and how do you help somebody conceptualize Bitcoin as a whole, and the impact it's going to have? And you can really do this by helping somebody identify, and you might, this might even help you as understand it yourself. But how I like to explain it is, I like to go back into history and help people identify what the underlying issue is. What is the problem? Why do we even need Bitcoin? Why don't we just continue using the currency system that we have? And when you dive into the history of money, like what is money, as a whole, what we break it down to is money is simply a technology. And if we go way back in history, our first form of transacting, and this is when we went from nomads to building civilization. And within that transition, at first people would barter goods. You would exchange something that you had, if you owned a farm and then someone else was a blacksmith, you would trade your farm and goods for metal. And that's just an example. The problem with it is that it requires a coincidence of wants, where both parties need to want what the other person has to offer. And if let's say, and this is a big issue, especially if you're a farmer, for example, and you have goods, and if you farm a lot of wheat, the supply of the goods you have to offer, are only going to be good for so long. And if you need, and if you need metal to build something, and you go to the blacksmith, but however they don't need wheat, Well, now you got to determine what he needs, and then you got to find someone willing to exchange what he needs for wheat to then go back to the blacksmith and get what you need in the first place. And this issue of bartering, where it requires both parties to want what each other has, it held back a lot of growth, especially in the beginning of civilization, and that's when people began deciding using a certain thing as a unit of exchange. And I mean, I'm almost positive like this started with shells or certain stones, and the longest one that has existed is gold. And people have used metals such as gold, silver, and copper. People determined that gold had value, and this essentially, there became a unit of account, it allowed for more further growth. Where now you can have a farmer who would be able to sell the wheat to anyone who needs wheat, and they'll buy it in gold, and then the farmer can go to the blacksmith and buy what he needs, and they're willing to accept gold, and it eliminates the problem of requiring a coincidence of wants from both parties in a transaction. And that's a prime example of how money is simply just a technology. And but then if we look at it, why did people choose gold? Like, why was gold determined as the best form of unit of exchange? And people, like humans, have tried all sorts of different materials as a unit of exchange, but the reason why gold lasted so long and was the best form of as a unit of exchange was because of its characteristics and its capabilities. Number one is its scarcity. It was a rare, valuable metal. It was very hard to discover and create more of it. It was created by Mother Nature. Nobody can artificially create more of it. And in order to get it, it costed a lot of time and energy. It was expensive to create more. And, that's why the scarcity value, humans value scarcity. The less there is of something, the more people tend to want it. This is a really weird analogy, but back in the day, fat people were considered, humans tied fat to wealth, and fat people were attractive. And today, it's like less than 1% of people have six-pack abs. And it's like, today it's the complete opposite, where if you're fit and you're in shape, that is found attractive, because that's now something that people don't, that the average person doesn't have. So people value and intrinsically, want what everyone else doesn't have. And that's just a natural psychological thing that us humans yearn for. And to tie this back into the whole debate, like the whole conversation about gold, is that it was valuable. There wasn't a lot of it. It was hard to create more, and people found value in it and were willing to accept it, and it became a unit of count. The problem then became, really transporting the metal. If you were a merchant and you were traveling hundreds of miles and you were going on a month, 2, 3, 4, 6 month, a year journey to go from one civilization to another, to go to a marketplace and then transact and go back, you needed to carry large amounts of heavy metals. And this then created another, systemic barrier of potential growth. And that's when the promissory note came into effect, where essentially, I believe, I don't know how accurate this is, but a lot of goldsmiths actually became banks, because what they began doing is people would store their gold at a goldsmith, and they would offer them a piece of paper that said, this piece of paper represents an obligation for us to give you back the gold, that of which we're custodying and protecting for you. And people began exchanging those paper notes as a store of value, because those notes were essentially as good as gold. Because if I gave you my piece of paper note that was a receipt to get the gold from the reserve, then you'd go to the goldsmith, and then you would take the gold, out of which was originally mine, but I gave the paper note to you, and now it's yours. And this was a huge growth factor, where paper currency just revolutionized the ability for people to exchange goods and services over longer distances. They were able to do it more securely. It was a lot easier to protect a piece of paper than it was to protect a treasure of a chest of heavy metals. And this was like the next systemic technological revolution of money, where we turned the holding value in metals to holding value on a small piece of paper, and this allowed for substantial amounts of growth. And there were booms and busts with these systems where people counterfeited the currency. Governments regulated, prevented that by essentially beheading or hanging anyone who was caught counterfeiting the currency. This was also even, people, they used to shave the metal off of gold coins to try to, take some of its value. And, people were caught doing that as well. And there were a lot of issues with counterfeiting the paper currency. Along with the coins, people would mix in cheaper metals, and governments did this as well. Especially when there were war efforts that needed to be funded. And there were problems with these systems. And there were booms and busts. We've gone through those cycles. And we happen to be in another one of those cycles right now, where, rather than a paper currency, we've turned all of these things digital. But, we lived in an age of a gold standard where the United States government and all the governments of the world, essentially custodied all the gold. And then, we had a promissory note, the U.S. dollar, which was a cash bill. And that was a promissory note that you could go to a bank and, receive the gold at the price per ounce that was set. That was a rate set by the central government or the central banks or whatever. And, people valued the paper currency. And the government printed, especially through the Vietnam War, they increased the currency supply. We went off the gold standard. And then they've continued doing that on exacerbated levels, and all these other factors such as derivatives and fractional reserve banking, that of which allows lending over lending over lending. We're just pumping up the system at this point. And when we saw the downside effects of that in 2008, which is before my time, I was too young to really know anything of what was going on at the time. But from my understanding, during 2008, the bubble kind of collapsed, and, we essentially, in order to prop up and keep the economy going, we had to create more currency. And this continues to debase the purchasing power of the average citizen, or anyone who operates under the U.S. dollar, which is essentially everyone in the entire world for the most part. And, the increase of the currency supply is essentially socializing, the debt payments amongst the population. And this is why, living standards are not as they used to be in terms of like people's hourly wage. Like minimum wage can buy you half as many things as it was probably able to 5 to 10 years ago. So we have this huge problem, and it's continuing today. And we're hitting another roadblock with money and our ability to grow as an economy with the current financial infrastructure. And the reason why is because I believe that when the internet came out and we were able to transact information, we weren't, there was a roadblock in computer science where we weren't able to transact value digitally. You weren't able to securely hold value online. And essentially the entire banking system remained separate from the internet. And that's why we have the existing financial system, and we haven't seen any substantial growth here. And I'm kind of going into another path there, so I'm going to backtrack it to 2008. But when 2008 occurred, Bitcoin was created in response to that. And in 2009, they essentially created the perfect form of money, or at least the best form of money that we have yet to exist. And it is now receiving mainstream adoption. And the reason why it's perfect form of money is because of its characteristics. And if we look at history, why did people value gold? Well, people valued gold because it was scarce. It maintained its value. You couldn't just create more of it. And the same thing goes for Bitcoin. In fact, it's even more scarce than gold. It is not just something that we can trust. Bitcoin is something we can trust because it's backed by code. And code can't be altered, manipulated, or changed in any way, shape, or form. The code is simply a set of rules that of which the system operates on. And with those set of rules, there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. There will never be more Bitcoin. If the price of Bitcoin goes up, you can't mine more of it. You can't artificially create more of it. You can't spend time and energy trying to find or create more Bitcoin, which is going to offset its value and bring down the cost. It's essentially a deflationary currency. It is the first ever currency that will never be manipulated by any supply increases. Even for gold, when the price of gold goes up, people begin mining more gold because they can sell it to the open marketplace for more money, and that increase in supply brings down the demand and the value. So it's perfectly scarce. It's also securely transactable. We can do it digitally, instantly, internationally, through a simple internet access. It fits, it ties right into the internet, and it's essentially it solves that roadblock issue that we've had to make it to the next step, especially with the growth of the internet, transacting information online. Now we can transact value online, and we can do it between party A and party B without needing any kind of intermediary, any bank or government or institution to verify that transaction to make sure it's secure from fraud. And they're not going to charge, a monopolized take rate. We just pay a simple network fee. And it's beneficial for the consumer being everyone that uses a currency in the world. So that's essentially all humans. And it is there's no downside to the Bitcoin network other than it being a threat to the existing system. And that's where we're heading. Where if we look at history, when we went from, gold or bartering to gold, the roadblock that was solved was the requirement of there being a coincidence of wants, where both parties needed exactly what both parties had to offer. And a unit of exchange solved that problem. And then we had gold, silver, and copper. And the next roadblock was as civilizations grew and merchants expanded and began trading goods with what other civilizations had to offer that they couldn't produce, came the paper currency, that of which allowed people to transact value a lot more freely, more securely. It was easier to do. And that was the next substantial form of currency that enabled more growth in humanity. And now we've hit this roadblock where we have the internet. However, we don't have the capability to transact value securely online without a intermediary with complete power and control over our value. And there's levers, but there's leverage behind that intermediary, where not only do they charge very high take rates and can monopolize our ability to transact value, but there's a lot of flaws in the system where, if I were to send funds internationally, there's exchange fees, legal fees. It goes through multiple parties, bank through bank through bank through bank, and there's just a lot of roadblocks that of which Bitcoin solves. And on top of that, it also maintains its value, where we've gotten into this issue that of which has existed throughout all of history, where governments debase currency for its own private interest, whether it's war efforts or infrastructure projects or all of these things. And it's coming at a cost to us, the user of that currency. And, Bitcoin solves all of these problems. So that's when I try to explain Bitcoin to somebody, first I want to get where their head's at. Like, what do you understand? What do you think about Bitcoin? Where's your head at with it? But then, it's important to help them identify a problem that of which they can directly correlate or respond to. If they see something in their life, like people have felt inflation the last 2 years. So people are becoming more aware of this issue because they feel it in their daily lives. And the more people feel the problems of the fiat currency system, the unconstitutional amount of currency debasement through monetary easing, the more people feel the pain of our system going to shit, the more open they're going to be to an alternative solution. And change is gradual then sudden, where people are beginning to adopt Bitcoin. They identify the problem, they see it as a solution, they begin betting on the idea. However, then the idea becomes real. It becomes something that people can actually use and transact, and people value it, and they're willing to receive it for value. And that's when a change occurs. And that change is occurring right now, and it's happening extremely fast. So that's my grand thesis of like, how can you explain Bitcoin to somebody who doesn't understand it? I like to tie it to history, the history of money, how it's a technology, how money has changed and revolutionized and allowed for increased growth within civilizations throughout human history, and how Bitcoin's going to be doing the same over the next decade, and how we're hitting this roadblock with the fiat currency system. There's all these underlying issues, and the old system is going to be replaced by a new system, and that system's here. So yeah, that's the end of the video. Hope you got some good knowledge out of this. Comment your thoughts.